The stars whispered secrets that only the broken could hear. On the scarred world of Sorellen, beneath a lavender sky smeared with 3 dying suns, she stood alone on the marble steps of the Hall of Judgment. Her body bore no armor, only ceremonial cords, twisted like vines across her gray skin, now dull with shame. Around her, towering spires hummed with cold energy, and rows of silent warriors held glinting, fork-pronged spears, an ancient rite, not used in generations. She was called Varia of the Hushed Moon, a name once sung in victory across the nebular winds. But today, her voice was stripped from her, her name spoken only to condemn. Behind the ceremonial stillness, rage stirred, controlled, but sharp enough to bleed. Her crime was not treason, not murder, not deceit. It was mercy. The Grand Chancellor, half machine, his face a shifting veil of circuitry and light, floated above the crowd. By sparing the Terran, he announced, voice amplified by the sacred towers, she betrayed the code of the core worlds. She let the virus of empathy slip through our gates. For that, the council finds her guilty. No cries followed, no shouts. The people were trained to be still, to honor justice even when it bit deep. But Varia's eyes did not seek pity among them. She stared beyond to the silent desert past the stone walls, where heat shimmered above the dust. She was searching for something, or someone not far from the capital, hidden among the lower caverns of the broken moon. A single Terran heartbeat pulsed in the dark. His name was Elias, and he did not belong here, not in this war, not in this galaxy, not even in this body. That limped from wound to wound like it was built to suffer. He was the reason for her sentence, though he had not known it. She had found him weeks ago, half dead in a crater surrounded by ash and silence, the last survivor of a crashed Earth diplomatic craft that had wandered into a forbidden squadron. She could have walked away. She almost did, but something in the way he whispered, not in pain, but in apology, had stopped her. "I'm sorry," he had said, eyes glassy with blood and confusion. "I didn't mean to fall." That moment, so small, had cracked her. A single word, fall. It had meant more than physics. It had meant guilt. And in that guilt, she recognized herself now, as the judgment beam flickered to life above her, ready to erase her memory and cast her soul into the void womb. Varia stood motionless. Yet she did not fear the coming silence. Somewhere out there, the Terran still lived. She had sent him away through a forbidden channel, risking more than banishment. And though her people would never see it, she believed it mattered. That humanity raw, loud, wounded, and full of flaws had a kind of strength even they could not comprehend. Then the air trembled. It was not the beam. It was a frequency shift, a note too soft for machines, but sharp enough to sting the ears of the organic. A ripple rolled through the plaza like thunder stretched thin. The guards raised their weapons in reflex. The beam froze mid-hum, light stuttering. Someone was approaching. From the canyon below. A dark speck rose against the light. Dust billowed around it as it climbed, unshielded, with a body bent but not broken. Metal clanged against stone. No one spoke, not even the Chancellor. The silence broke only when the figure cleared the outer wall and stood at the foot of the steps, a human, limping, bare-chested, covered in cuts. A makeshift blade on his back, forged from scavenged ship alloy and bone. His eyes not cold, but burning, locked with Varia's. Elias had come. He did not shout, he did not threaten. But when he opened his mouth, his voice carried beyond any amplifier. "If you raise your weapons against her," he said, "you raise them against the part of you that's still alive." And for a heartbeat that lasted across a galaxy, the entire hall froze. The sun glare off his skin looked like firelight, though no flames danced in the plaza. Dust clung to the sweat streaking his face, and the sharp outline of old burns made. His body seemed less like flesh and more like something hammered out of war itself. Elias didn't move as the guards tightened their grip on their weapons, nor when their eyes, the color of storm glass, flicked between him and the Chancellor for silent orders. He just breathed slowly with the weight of someone who had been crawling for hours under a sky that hated him. His chest rose and felt like it was still learning how to keep going. But in his eyes, there was no hesitation. Not fear, only something deeper. Something defiant. Varia couldn't speak. Her sentence had silenced. Her tongue through a molecular cord that twisted around her vocal cords like a curse. But her eyes widened. Even in disgrace, even in the rigid finality of a culture that prized obedience above all, she had not truly believed he would come. Not here, not now, not alone. He was one man. One broken, unarmed human. And still, he walked forward. The Chancellor's voice was calm, artificial. "Terran," it spoke, voice split in 3 frequencies. Your intrusion is unlawful. The Hall of Judgment is sacred space. You are not welcome here. Elias blinked slowly once. His voice was soft, but the tone hit harder than any scream. Neither is injustice. The crowd stirred. Not with gasps or murmurs. Cerulean law forbade such things during a tribunal, but bodies shifted, heads tilted. The discomfort of truth, that ancient shiver in the spine of even the most trained soul, spread like quiet fire. One child among them, barely old enough to stand upright, reached instinctively for its mother's hand. I know what she did, Elias continued, his voice rough like stone dragging through wind. She saved a life, my life, when she should have walked away. That's not betrayal. That's being more than a soldier. That's being someone who sees life as more than obedience. He took one step forward, then another. You call that weakness? On Earth, we call that strength. The Chancellor's eyelids flared for a second, then dimmed again, unreadable. Your words are irrelevant. Our laws are not dictated by human values. But you asked for our contact, Elias said, a note of tired anger slipping through. You sent ships to the Outer Rim. You invited diplomacy. You wanted to study us. You wanted to judge us. You looked for weaknesses. And maybe you saw them, our chaos, our stubbornness, our fighting. But you missed something. We don't just fight to win. We fight when it hurts. We fight for each other. He turned slowly to face the gathered crowd. He looked at the soldiers first, their tall frames encased in ceremonial silver, faces hidden behind mirrored masks. You think she betrayed you? But she didn't. She honored something older than law. Something older than your wars. She chose compassion. In your world, that looks like a flaw. But where I come from, it's the only reason we made it out of the dirt. A shiver passed through the wind. The clouds, strange and alive like slow creatures of gas and light, shifted above, casting a momentary shadow over the marble floor. Elias stepped to Varia's side. She looked at him, her hand still bound by justice coils that hummed with cold blue light. Her lips trembled not from fear, but from something deeper, disbelief. He lowered his voice. I don't know if I can save you, he said, this time just for her, but I can make them see what you really are. The Chancellor floated down a measure. You speak with passion, but passion is not proof. This warrior violated sacred code. Even the ancients do not grant forgiveness for contamination by lesser species. Then maybe your ancients were wrong, Elias replied. Silence fell like a dropped blade. The Chancellor paused. A subtle ripple moved through its light shell, a flicker of unreadable data. You would challenge our entire code of honor on the basis of your species' sentimentality? Elias reached behind him. The sword he drew was not elegant. It was forged in haste, shaped by desperation. Not a weapon of beauty, but a weapon of meaning. He held it low, not in threat, but in promise. No, he said. I challenge it on the basis of what she taught me. That even when everyone turns their back, even when you're told that kindness is weakness, you can still choose it, and when you do, it changes everything. From the far edge of the crowd, a single voice rose. It was not a cheer. It was a hum. A soft, ancient tone, the song of the hushed moon, the same lullaby Varia's people once sang to their wounded. Another voice joined, then two more. The guards hesitated. The Chancellor's light dimmed again, and Elias, the lone Terran, stood. Between them and the woman they condemned, not as a conqueror, not as a soldier, but as someone who simply refused to leave. Asterisk. The hum grew into something richer, something with weight, not of volume but of meaning, an old melody buried in memory, forbidden yet never forgotten. And there, in the center of the Hall of Judgment, Maria closed her eyes, her body still bound, but her soul suddenly unchained by the sound. It was the song her mother once sang when war took her father. It was the sound of mourning and survival stitched together, a promise that pain could shape strength without poisoning it. She opened her eyes again, and for the first time since her sentence, they were not full of sorrow, they were full of light. Elias stood beside her, breathing heavier now, as if the air was thicker near the ancient walls. His fingers were calloused, his arm trembling from the effort of holding the blade steady, but he didn't lower it. The blade wasn't a threat. It was a symbol, forged from parts of the vessel that once carried peace, and now lay broken across the Cerulean desert. That ship had held 6 people, from Earth scientists, diplomats, dreamers. They had all died, all except him. And even he had almost wished otherwise. Until her. I remember the first time I looked up, Elias murmured, not to the Chancellor. Not to the crowd, but to her. You were standing in front of the crater, your face covered in dust, like a statue from a dream. I didn't know if you were real. I thought I died. But you knelt down, and you touched my chest like you were checking to see if my heart still beat. You said nothing. You didn't need to. Varia couldn't speak, but her tears told. Stories. Her kind didn't cry easily, not because they lacked emotion, but because control was considered strength. To cry was to let go, and to let go meant risking exile. But she had already been exiled by choice, long before the trial. The moment she lifted Elias from the smoking wreckage, her future had changed. He leaned a little closer, his voice cracking now, low enough for only her ears. I heard you sing when you thought I was unconscious. Every night, that same song. I didn't know the words, but I felt them. You weren't just healing my wounds, you were healing my mind. You stayed, even when I screamed from the pain. Even when I didn't deserve it, you could have turned me in. You could have killed me to protect your name, but instead, you carried me through the desert on your back. He paused, a breath lost to grief. Why? He asked. Why me? She looked at him, eyes raw, throat aching against the silence, nodding her voice. And though she couldn't answer aloud, she reached slowly, painfully, and brushed her bound fingers across his jaw. It was not a romantic touch. It was a farewell, a thank you, a final prayer wrapped in motion. He understood. The Chancellor watched silently, its light pulses growing more erratic, like static confusion in the ancient code. This was not how judgments played out. This was not how condemned souls behaved. No one sang, no one cried. No one resisted in silence this loud. The crowd was fracturing, not by force, but by feeling. From among the elders, a voice broke through. The hum. I knew her mother, the elder said, her face like cracked stone beneath ceremonial gold. She was fierce. She once risked her post to stop the burning of the verdant shell. Another voice followed, and her father stood between a firestorm and a refugee village. He said some lives are more than lines on a map. Another, this Terran he speaks as if he carries grief like we do. And then the Chancellor said, something no one expected. Enough. The word echoed, not with power, but with uncertainty. Elias lowered the blade slightly. I don't want war, he said. I don't want vengeance. I came back because I remembered how you held me. Varia, I remembered how you stayed up all night, watching the skies, even when your eyes were red from lack of sleep. You taught me that silence can protect, but it can also be cruel. So I'm breaking it for you. The guards still held their weapons, but some lowered their tips, confused. The hall itself seemed to breathe differently now, the ancient architecture, resonating with emotion it had not held for lifetimes. And Varia, goddess of restraint, warrior of the hushed moon, began to tremble. Not in fear, but in release. Her fingers dug into her palms, fighting the binds. Her body shook, not from pain, but from memory. Then, with a crack of light and the sudden sizzle of broken energy cords, she dropped to her knees and gasped. Voice had returned, not through permission. Through will. She looked up, coughing on the power that flooded back into her lungs, and when she spoke, it was broken and hoarse, but hers. I saved him, she rasped. Because I remembered who we used to be. Asterisk, asterisk, the moment her voice cracked the air, it was as if the very walls of the hall inhaled in shock. No one had ever broken the justice binding. Not in any cycle within recorded memory. The cords had snapped like brittle glass, and yet the energy should have seared through her veins, reduced her throat to ash. But Varia lived, kneeling, breath. Ragged, voice returned. Her skin glowed faintly now, not from divine fire, but from defiance. The kind born in silence too long endured. The Chancellor's frame wavered, flickering. Its circuits blinked faster, overwhelmed not by rage, but by something it was not built to process. Disbelief. She speaks. One of the guards muttered. Not to anyone in particular, but as though needing to confirm to themselves that the impossible had occurred. The binding was absolute. Elias dropped to one knee beside her, his hand gently on her shoulder. She leaned into it not in weakness, but in trust. Their bond, grown not from politics or shared species, but from pain and survival, now breathed, in full view of an entire world that had never known what such a bond could look like. A human and a Cerulean, side by side, kneeling not in surrender, but in rising purpose. Varia coughed once, then raised her eyes to the Chancellor. Her voice still rasped, each word was sharpened by the weight of truth. You sentenced me for empathy, for saving a life you deemed beneath us. But that code, that ancient law you cling to, it was never about purity. It was about fear. A lie rewritten over generations until none remembered what we truly ran from. The crowd shifted again. Several of the elders looked at each other with uneasy expressions. The Chancellor remained still. Elias frowned. What is she talking about? he asked quietly, and Varia turned to him, sorrow deepening the edges of her gaze. You were not the first, Elias, she said. Not the first Terran to reach our skies. Centuries ago, before the collapse, there was a human craft that crossed into our starstream by accident. They were explorers, not soldiers. And one among them, a woman named Myra Castel. She saved my ancestor during a raid on the Broken Spire. She stayed behind when her ship was destroyed, helped rebuild a village that was collapsing from plague. Elias listened, eyes narrowing, his breath catching. She became beloved, a symbol of hope. But when our high courts realized that her kindness had shifted the hearts of thousands, they panicked. They feared the erosion of discipline, the dissolution of order, so they erased her from our history. They renamed it a contamination and passed the first code, the isolation doctrine, no contact, no mercy, and anyone who broke it was sentenced to the void womb. Elias looked toward the Chancellor, fury flashing across his face. You lied to your own people. You buried peace in a grave and called it law. The Chancellor's voice, for the first time, was not steady. That history was sealed for the survival of our unity. Your species spreads chaos. You corrupt with emotion. That is not harmony. But it is life, Virea snapped, her voice strengthening now. Myra's blood still runs through my line. I carry the memory you tried to burn. You call humans dangerous because they don't follow the script you carved in stone. That maybe it's time we stop reading stones and start listening to hearts again. A tremor passed through the ground, not seismic, but emotional. The old codes were tied to psychic resonance built on a collective belief. And that belief was crumbling now. Varea's truth was like an infection the law had no immunity to. One of the guards dropped his spear, the metallic clang echoing through the chamber. Another took a cautious step backward, unsure where loyalty ended and conscience began. The Chancellor's lights flickered once more. You risk the fabric of our culture, it hissed. The archive was sealed for a reason. Varea stood. She was trembling still, but upright. Her voice rang clearer now, the words weaving through the air like an electric wind. Then unseal it. Let them see what you buried. If our unity is built on a lie, then it was never unity to begin with. It was control. Elias rose beside her. Blade now lowered completely, no longer necessary. If you fear truth, you've already lost. For a long moment, no one moved. And then, from deep within the council chamber's upper balcony, a voice boomed gravelly, ancient, but unmistakably. Commanding, release the archive. Gasps read like sparks. The crowd parted as a robed figure stepped into view. Elder Aaron, the last living soul who had served before the last star cycle reforms, his skin like faded marble. I remember Myra, he said. I was a child. When she healed my sister, I watched her burn in silence when the edicts changed. I carried that silence into my old age. He looked at Varia, then at Elias. No more silence. A chime sounded, a deep, resonant tone that hadn't been heard in lifetimes. The archive gates, locked for centuries, began to unseal, their ancient doors creaking open behind the hall-dot light. Poured out, not artificial, but organic, and within it, truth. History, memory, the faces of the forgotten dot, and all at once, the people realized that humanity's true power had never been in war. It had always been in remembering what others were forced to forget. Asterisk. The doors of the archive opened like a wound in the mountain, spilling light that was not just illumination, but revelation. Holograms bloomed into the airsoft golden projections of the past unspooling in full clarity. The crowd gasped not with sound, for such a thing was still forbidden, but with motion. Shoulders stiffened, heads leaned forward, and even the guards lowered their weapons in instinctive awe. Across the marble floor and along the crystalline columns, images floated, the face of Myra Castel brown-skinned, eyes sun-bright with defiance, speaking to a group of Cerealian youth in what looked like a field hospital. Another showed her, holding hands with a dying elder, whispering something that made the woman smile before death took her. There were scenes of rebuilding, laughter, dance, and shared tears between species the council had long taught were never meant to coexist. Then came the records, signed council orders, the isolation doctrine, handwritten ancient ink by quivering fingers, directives to destroy footage, silence witnesses, and encode new narratives into the Cerealian education systems. It was not just a secret. It was a purge, a deliberate rewriting of truth cloaked as tradition. And now it spilled into the open, wild, and uncontrollable, a flood no law could dam again. Varia stood silent amid the chaos, her expression unreadable. Elias could feel the storm behind her eyes. This wasn't vindication, it was heartbreak. She had lived her entire life shaped by a lie and only now saw the cost of believing in it too long. Her people, so proud and strict, had been trained not to feel, not to question. And that training had cost them everything. But revelation is a double-edged gift. While some in the crowd wept silently, some stood taller, their faces darkening with anger, not at the lie, but at its exposure. A deep growl of discontent began at the back of the hall, where elite high custodians, untouched by age or doubt, had gathered. Their leader, a stone-jawed figure named Relic, stepped forward with the slow, deliberate menace of someone who had waited decades for a moment like this. He did not address the Chancellor. He ignored Elias. He stared straight at Varia. "You have invited chaos," Relic said, his voice like dry thunder. "You have torn open the archive not for justice, but for a Terran. A species who destroyed their own world and now seeks to infect ours with emotion." "Emotion," Elias muttered under his breath, stepping in front of Varia, "isn't the virus. It's the cure." Relic raised his hand, and a different tone pierced the air, higher, urgent, violent. The guards who had lowered their weapons now stood torn between two forces, the old law and the new truth. Relic barked something in a forgotten dialect, and half of them turned, uniforms flaring with kinetic armor as blades clicked into place. "We're going to purge the hall. Move," Elias shouted, grabbing Varia and pulling her behind a pillar, as the first blast tore through a hologram of Myra Castel. The image shattered into floating sparks, and the crowd screamed, this time unable to stay silent. All decorum broke. Civilians fled. The floor vibrated from the sudden thunder of metal dash on dash stone. The Chancellor rose, flickering with indecision, its code spiraling into a cascade of unresolved logic loops. The archive had not predicted this, and neither had Varia. She clutched her side, where a shard of energy had nicked her during the blast. Blood, dark like starlight, oozed through her cords. "I thought once the truth came out," she whispered, "they were never afraid of lies." Elias said, dragging her toward the rear steps, "They were afraid of choice. Because now people have to choose who they want to be." They ducked into the side corridors of the archive. Behind them, Relic's men advanced, firing stun rounds that liquefied walls and left sonic burns in the air. Holograms flickered in panic, distorting under the shockwaves. One collapsed completely, Myra's face bending in grief before vanishing into code, leaned heavily on Elias. "There's a vault," she gasped, "below the archive. A place Myra built with my ancestor. They hid backup memories. Files, names." Elias nodded. "Then that's where we go." Their path twisted through ancient tunnels, past sealed rooms that hadn't been touched in generations. As they moved deeper, Varia spoke between shallow breaths. "They used to say humanity was noise. But Myra called it music untrained, yes, but alive. She said your weakness was your heart. And she meant it as a compliment." Elias laughed bitterly. "Then I guess I've got a hell of a compliment to give back." When they reached the vault, the entrance was sealed in organic steel, locked by a gene-encoded resonance scanner. Varia pressed her palm against it. At first, nothing happened. Then a soft tone pulsed through the stone like a heartbeat. The door slid open with a whisper. Inside was a chamber filled with old light. Crystalline memory spires shimmered like underwater suns. And in the center stood a single chair with two handrests. "She made this," Varia said, touching it reverently. "A bridge. A place where Terran and Cerulean minds could join for one memory cycle. It was meant to be used in peace, but it's going to be used in war," Elias finished. From above, the sound of boots and blades echoed closer. "We don't have time," she said. "Then let's do it now." He sat. She joined him. Their hands touched on the rests, and the vault door began to quake under enemy strikes. Their minds joined in one final act of shared memory. Not to escape, but to let the world feel what they had lived. Asterisk, asterisk, the vault door groaned like an old beast resisting its end, then shattered inward in a shriek of torn steel. Relic's soldiers burst through, faceless under visors, blades drawn and humming with compressed light. But what they found inside the chamber did not match the expectation of easy execution. Elias and Varia sat motionless, heads bowed, palms resting together on the conduit chair, bodies lit by a glowing aura that pulsed from the memory spires around them. They were not hiding. They were merging. And the walls around them were no longer walls, but a storm. The vault itself, crafted in an age before fear had replaced understanding, was more than a storage chamber. It was a transmitter, a psychic bridge designed to carry the contents of memory directly into the minds of any Cerulean connected to the source grid. And when Varia's blood mingled with Myra's distant genetic echoes, completed the bond with Elias's raw human memories. Something beautiful and terrible bloomed. It exploded outward, not with fire, with feeling. The soldiers stopped mid-stride. Some cried out and fell to their knees, clutching their heads. Others just froze, blades dropping to the floor with a soft, shivering clatter. Relic stumbled, his face warping in confusion as a surge of foreign thoughts burned into him, images. He had never lived, grief he had never carried, hope he had never dared to feel. He saw through Elias's eyes the burning crash, the endless walk across the dunes, the hallucinations of lost crewmates whispering guilt into his bones. He felt the ache of waking up night after night, screaming into a void that gave no comfort. Only silence, but more than that, he felt her. Varia's memories opened like floodgates, a childhood trained in silence. A sword placed in her hands at 7. Her mother's funeral, no tears allowed. The first time she killed in battle and wasn't allowed to speak afterward for 3 days in penance for hesitation. And then, years later, finding Elias in a crater, broken and apologizing, and for the first time feeling something that didn't match her training, a need to save, not obey. The psychic storm swallowed the hall of judgment above, sweeping across the central city and into the neural lattice of the Cerulean population. Millions dropped what they were doing as the wave of memory surged into their minds. They did not see only war or pain, they saw choice. They felt what it meant to be. Human, not in power, not in conquest, but in the soft, fragile bravery of survival, in hugging a friend who was breaking, in staying behind when it would be easier to leave, in seeing beauty where others saw ruin, in saving a life because it mattered even if no one ever knew. Chancellor, still hovering above the hall, emitted a wailing tone, its programming unraveling in real time. Unauthorized dissemination of corrupted cognitive patterns, memory breach, logic divergence detected. Its voice broke. Then it fell silent. Elias's eyes opened first. He gasped like someone drowning finding air. His vision was blurred, but he saw the soldiers now cowering, some weeping openly. Relic had backed to a corner, his jaw slack, his body twitching as if his own mind rebelled against his years of certainty. Varia opened her eyes next. They shimmered, not with exhaustion, but clarity. She stood slowly, deliberately, and looked at them all. "You raised your weapons against me," she said, voice no longer weak, but thundering with calm authority. But she turned to Elias. He raised his voice. And then, when no one would listen, he raised his soul. "You call us traitors. But we are the mirror you were too afraid to look into." One of the youngest soldiers, barely into her maturity cycle, stood trembling, weapon at her feet. "I saw everything," she whispered. "I didn't know it could hurt like that and still be beautiful." Relic barked a command, trying to regain control, but his voice faltered. "This is manipulation," he growled. "They poisoned your thoughts." "No," Varia said, walking toward him, unarmed. "We reminded them they still had thoughts." Relic lunged. He was faster than he looked, a last attempt to crush the moment before it became irreversible. His blade arced toward Elias's exposed back. But Varia moved faster. She caught the blade mid-swing with her bare hand. The edge bit into her palm, drawing a line of blood, but she held it steady. Her face didn't flinch. "You've had your moment," she said to Relic. "Now it's ours." She twisted the blade from his hand and threw it behind her, where it clattered harmlessly against the spire base. Relic sank to his knees, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. Then, slowly, the guards around him followed. One by one, they knelt not in submission, but in recognition. Above, the Chancellor's lights dimmed fully, and for the first time since its construction, the Hall of Judgment went dark, and outside, as the skies over Cerulean shifted from orange to violet dusk, the first rainfall in a decade began to fall. Not acid rain. Water. As if the planet itself had been waiting for this moment to forgive itself. 2. The rain fell soft as breath and warm as memory. For a long time, no one moved beneath it. The people of Cerulean, raised under centuries of silence and law, now stood bareheaded in the plaza outside the shattered hall, lifting their faces skyward as if tasting something for the first time. The moisture clung to their skin like apology, washed over metal and marble alike, cleansing judgment and guilt with equal grace. From the ruins of the archive to the courtyard where blades once gleamed in threat, the entire city stood still, not in fear, but in wonder. The flood of memory had passed, but its echo remained, stitched into every soul who had felt what Elias and Varia had dared to share. Inside the vault, the lights of the memory spires dimmed, their purpose fulfilled. The conduit chair powered, Down with a sigh, almost grateful to rest. Elias sat quietly at its edge, soaked through and shivering, but smiling faintly. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of having given all of himself. No armor. No plan. Just the raw heart of a man who refused to let one life be discarded without meaning. Varya stood beside him, her wounded palm wrapped loosely in a torn scrap of his shirt. She looked thinner now, her posture carved from exhaustion. But her eyes burned brighter than ever, lit from within by something deeper than victory purpose. She extended a hand to him, and he took it, rising slowly. Their fingers locked with quiet familiarity, as if the moment didn't need words anymore. Too much had been spoken in silence already. Above them, the elders emerged one by one, not as rulers, but as listeners. And behind them, the Chancellor's husk, once a symbol of unshakable control, was being dismantled by its own engineers. The code erased by those who had finally remembered how to disobey. Elder Aaron approached them with careful steps. His voice, though old, was steady. "You did not destroy us," he said. "You woke us. And now we must decide what to do with our awakening." Varya bowed her head. "Don't make monuments of us. Don't make myths. Just remember, that will be enough." But Aaron shook his head. "There will be stories, child. There always are, but perhaps now they will be true ones." Elias turned toward the field where the crowd now gathered, Cerellians of all castes and corners, soaked and silent, waiting. "They want to know what comes next," he said, barely more than a breath. "Then show them," Varya said. "You're still the outsider, the alien. That hasn't changed." He laughed softly. "Feels strange to be the one who stayed behind." She smiled. "You didn't stay behind. You arrived." Together, they stepped out of the vault into the rain dot at first. The crowd only watched. But then a sound rose, a slow, deep tone. Not the hum of judgment or tradition, but the song of the hushed moon, sung not in defiance now, but in unity. And it wasn't only Cerulean voices. It was Elias, too, his rough voice learning the melody by memory, humming where the words failed him, letting his presence fill the spaces between the lines. Children danced barefoot through puddles that shimmered with refracted light from the shattered towers. Elders embraced after decades of hardened custom. Warriors placed their spears in a pile at the plaza's center and walked away unarmed. Somewhere high above, a signal beacon blinked, broadcasting a message not of surrender, but of invitation. A welcome to the stars, not for war, but for healing. Elias looked out at it all and felt something in his chest loosen. Not just relief, not even pride, but home. A word that had meant nothing since Earth went quiet, since his ship fell from the sky, since he buried the last of his friends beneath alien sand. And now it meant something again, because someone had chosen to save him when the universe said he didn't matter. Varya leaned close, whispering, "You were never just a guest here. You were the proof." He turned to her, blinking against the rain. Of what? She looked to the sky, then back at him, tears mixing with water. That humanity isn't a threat, it's a question. One we're finally brave enough to answer. And as the three suns broke through the parting clouds, casting warm gold across a world once ruled by cold law, the story ended not with a final battle, not with a victory march, but with two hands held together beneath the sky reborn, because sometimes the most powerful thing a human can do in the face of judgment is refuse to walk away.